Good afternoon again from Sunraven. Here it's September 9th, and now crossed the threshold between summer in practice and fall, though as we spoke about last week, this transition isn't the same for everybody. And as an example, in the Southern Hemisphere, this is winter to spring. So things are relative in our lives, and change is one of those things that creates a certain amount of turmoil in our living and in our being. And with all change, there is a certain type of stress that we experience. So today we thought we'd talk about stress and managing stress. And it's a continuation of the same conversation that we've been having, which is how one lives their life fully, to feel well and to be able to live life, experience life, and practice life in a way that is meaningful. How we define meaning, how we define productivity as an example, even how we define stress are all words that require a certain amount of definition, especially in a conversation and discussion, because you may be thinking one thing and we may be thinking another. In fact, Robin and I probably have quite significantly different views on any subject of any particular word, like health or wellness or stress. So that's part of the reason why we hope that this dialogue with you is of value, because we're not one mind, and nor is anybody listening to us. And while we have ideas, experience, knowledge, the process of living is a verb, meaning it's unfolding all the time, and we're here to learn and to experience, to grow. All of those are verbs, and so there's nothing static about it. There's no necessarily singular objective that all of us will necessarily agree on, or at least in terms of, perhaps most importantly, how we get there. Maybe the objective we might agree on is somewhere down the road we find peace, harmony, tranquility, oneness. We may agree that that's where we're all heading, but where that may be in our future requires that we identify clearly what we're experiencing in the moment, and then dealing with the conditions of the moment, figuring out how we can get from here to there. And those are the challenges of our lives. And to begin this conversation about stress, I thought it would be useful, Robin, for you and I to both share our definitions of stress.
Okay.
As a way that we could begin to sort of all get on the same page, or at least to begin this conversation where we sort of know what we're speaking of. Do you want to begin with that?
Yeah, so what comes to mind for me about stress in the whole mind, body, spirit realm is the ability that the body has an innate ability to get back to a state of some state of order. So I want to just share that stress is actually a healthy part of our response to help us stay safe and alive. So it's sort of like a signal. And then I just outlining that there's different states of stress. One is, there's three states that I see it. One is chemical, one is physical, and one is emotional. And I tend to work on the emotional realm. I think, Michael, you could speak more about what a threat might be of stress in the physical, and then chemical. And when I say chemical, I'm coming out of, just coming out of healing Lyme disease in the past couple of years, and all of it mattered, the three, the emotional, physical, and the chemical. So I don't think we're always aware, and I want to ask you what you think about chemical, what chemical means to our bodies in a threat. And I'm thinking like, Michael will share more about, heavy metals, bacteria, viruses, hormones, blood sugar. So that's like a physical, and it affects us emotionally as well. But that's sort of my definition of the three, and then you can share more about the physical, I'm sure, and how you would define it.
Well, I appreciate that. As a physician, even the word physician sort of suggests physical matter. That's where I'm often expected to go with answers to questions like that, and I appreciate that. And of course, I do have some answers, or at least ideas, about the physical body. As I see it, physical and chemical are the same, because essentially, though we may, there's physical things that we're aware of, like our neck hurts, and then but that neck pain is associated with chemistry in our body that's, sort of stimulating nerves. And the chemistry in our body might be intracellular abnormalities in terms of sort of calcium, magnesium, those sort of elements and atoms, or it may be something to do with tissue injury, like a broken bone.
Like a trauma.
So the physical and chemical to me are very similar, and as a physician, of course, I'm asked often to relate to those. But here's how I would really answer the question if I was to be asked objectively without any assumption about how I would answer the question. I see stress a little differently than you described. Even though I think everything that you described is accurate. There's emotional stress, there are physical stresses, there are chemical stresses. But to me, for the sake of this discussion, I see stress falling into two categories. Category one is stress we're aware of, and category two is stress we're not aware of. And so to me, stress is defined by anything that affects our system that forces our system to readjust. And so as you said, which I think is really important, is stress in general, or the stressors, have value. And the stress response has value. So one thing that I would say in managing stress is to eliminate stress as an objective is perhaps not the wisest way to frame the conversation, because it's neither possible to eliminate all stress, nor is it desirable to eliminate all stress. Right. Because in stress, we are forced to adjust, and in that forcing to adjust, especially when it's conscious, we could help ourselves quite a bit and help other people. So there's something inherently valuable about stress. The issue, though, for the conversation, and I think the way most people use the word stress colloquially, is something that does bother them, something that is straining their life, something that is making it harder to achieve what it is that they identify as their purpose, and therefore a challenge that's a little overwhelming. So it's crossed some sort of threshold. And that's where I like to keep, in my mind, that's how I like to keep it, is in those areas we're aware of and those areas we're not aware of. The areas we're not aware of course, become very difficult to speak about, but we typically have blind spots, and the blind spot that we tend to have is in the chemistry. So we don't know what's going on in our cells unless it percolates to the surface and becomes a symptom. Mm-hmm. So you don't know right now, if you're listening to me, how good your calcium-magnesium balance is, frankly. I mean, you might have crampiness, you may not sleep well, you may have osteoporosis, you may make some assumptions that the balance may not be ideal. But you don't really know on the level of analysis, and nor if your blood is taken, your bones are biopsied, is it clear that that's true everywhere in your body. You've got 45 trillion cells, and so the know of our physical body is really beyond the capacities of modern science. So a lot of what goes on in our bodies that might stress our bodies on the chemical level, we don't know about. But what most people talk about when they say, I feel stressed, is the stuff you feel. And that's where you get to breaking down the emotional stuff into two categories. One are the physical symptoms, pain as an example, and two is the emotional response to the physical symptom. So I'm in physical pain chronically, and I'm depressed as a result, or I'm sad, or I'm angry as a result. Those are two layers of that same phenomena of I'm aware of being stressed, and I've got both the physical awareness and sort of a psycho-emotional awareness. And to me, that's where the conversation goes, where we want to manage stress to, when we feel it, we're aware of it physically or emotionally, it's a light on our dashboard which says, please attend to this. And then the question is, how How do you break it down? How do you approach it? But the other, even though you don't feel what's going on in your body, this is why it's important to take care of your body and to do your best and to do smart things, because asymptomatic behind the scenes are things that are stressing us, and we want to be in as reasonable balanced state so though our body goes through these challenges all the time, it doesn't percolate to the surface as becoming symptomatic. So we might get exposed to a virus, and that stresses our body. You know, when you're in that asymptomatic phase of a viral illness, your body is stressed. You don't necessarily know it at the moment. What you'd like to happen is your body is in such good shape, because your body-mind-spirit complex is in good shape, that the virus comes and goes, that your cells respond to the stress appropriately, and they never percolate to the surface of really having to bother, interfere in your life. And frankly, that's how a lot of things happen to us. We recover from a lot more conditions than we might ever imagine, and our body responds to those types of stressors pretty nicely. It's when it gets overwhelmed and flooded do we get into trouble, and we become aware of the symptoms. But the first half of it is, not for today, but maybe for other conversations, learn to take care of yourself really well, body, mind, spirit, and those unconscious, under the surface stressors will be minimized. But today, let's talk about when the stress overflows and you're aware of it.
Yeah, well, yes, and I think the first step is the compass. You know, if you're lost in the woods, you know, what does a compass do? What does it do?
Well, I think that's a good point. So I was gonna, you know, think we would get there too, which is to get anywhere, you need to know where you are and you need to know both where you're heading. You need both points of reference. So checking in with yourself is a big factor. So when you feel stressed, just as an aside, so let's say you feel overwhelmed, something's not going right, you're having physical symptoms, you're having emotional symptoms, or you just have some sort of intuitive sense that you're not there, that's a light on the dashboard going off, and what you want to do is check in with yourself, have a way to assess where you are, what's going on. Then similarly, you want to maybe as a routine practice, keep an idea in your mind, sort of a directionality. Where's your North Star? Where are you heading? So that wherever you may find yourself, you can still stay on the path. Right. The path may wander. You may wind up with all sorts of challenges in life. But if you're pretty clear on where that's going to lead you, the fact of the matter is you're less stressed, because one of the major stresses of our life is we'll never get there. Or we're going to get so interfered with or so diverted that we'll never get there. So but if you accept that the path can be very windy and you will still get there because you have such a clear sense of the North Star, then you may be able to actually appreciate the journey and all those individual challenges as somehow contributing to your growth and development that gives you the skills you need to ascend to that space.
Right. So first we know our compass, where we are, awareness, consciousness is, yes, okay, I'm feeling, and we may go into the physical little, signs that you're stressed. You know, the physical body might tighten, the heart might start palpitating, the mind may be forward thinking, which we'll call that anxiety. So compass of getting a state of awareness where you are, and then like Michael, you're saying is, to follow a plan. And we can't move unless we're conscious of that state, and then the things that we can do to help us, like being aware, breathing, calming then being able to self-regulate into a rest and digest state. That will absolutely help us see the whole picture, right?
Well, so I'm going to move the camera closer, by the way, because I'm getting a report that maybe our sound is a little on the low side. And so without losing our picture, I'm going to try to bring our camera closer to us. Okay. If you're hearing us better now or not so well, please send us a note. We'll try to adjust. I think the camera and the iPhone obviously have its limitations, so I apologize for the technical side of this. But now we just look bigger to ourselves, and I hope our sound is also bigger to you.
Yes, great. So consciousness of awareness, which Michael, you're sharing, is so important. And then self-regulating tools or tips to help us come into the present, because if we're in the mind and we're thinking about the future, we're going to just stay in that loop of, of stress in the body. So like animals we talked about last week, what they do, shake it off or something that we can come back to.
So there's two things that you're saying that I think are really important. One is when you're sensing some overwhelm, that you pause, you check in with yourself. So you have some sort of calming, centering practice. And then maybe you go through some sort of process, which Robin, I think you can describe pretty well, where you sort of check into the different parts of you and see what's happening. But then you also, by keeping to breathe and your sights on that North Star, you may have to add the practice of reminding yourself and sort of trying to reassure yourself. And some of that requires the same sort of grounding process, which is, okay, I'm on the ground. Yes, the wind is really blowing, but the house is secure. I've been through this a dozen times. The storm will pass. And you use those tools that you have. Sometimes it's important to, connect to other people. So sometimes being alone is a big part of stress, feeling like you're handling this all by yourself, and there's a lot of fear in being left alone or abandoned or neglected, or something will happen and nobody will find you. I mean, there's these, but the other part of it is, as I'm just trying to hear myself talk, we get into the loops of stories. And part of the stress is not what's happening now necessarily, but what we anticipate, which of course may happen. We're smart people. We can, through experience, have certain reasonable predictions of outcome. However, we also know, because we're smart people and experienced, that that's not always the case. It doesn't always come true that way. And so we do want to be mindful about investing too much of our time and energy predicting the future when we have something to deal with in the present. And this present moment. So if, let's say, you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and you take that pause and you check in. Maybe the first thing you do is you check in with your body. Where in my body is this being experienced? Is it my neck? Is it my stomach? Is it my head? Do I have a twitch? You sort of just register that. Then maybe there's other practices. Maybe you take some deep breaths. You try to get your diaphragm moving, because that's where your parasympathetic nervous system could stimulate, meaning turn off the sympathetic fight or flight response to give you a little bit more space, a little bit more comfort. And then with that maybe comes a little bit more presence, a little bit more conscious awareness of the total picture. And then you could go ask your body, as an example, and interrogate the twitch in your leg. What's going on here? And close your eyes and think through it. You may have a dominant emotional state that you're aware of. Fear, sadness, grief. And you could, be with that. Part of this is, again, not to dismiss these things. These are signals that something's going on around you or within you, and that your body's being asked to make an adjustment. Your body, when I say body, I mean your whole being is being asked to make an adjustment, part of which is your body, physiologically, but part of it is your interpretation of what you're aware of going on in your body, or your interpretation and awareness of what's going on in your mind.
So the emotions, I hear you saying, are really important not to register them or acknowledge them, because the emotion helps us get in touch with the true need in the moment. So an example would be, I'm feeling anxious about having food in the house, and so the mind can, get carried away with that. So we check in. Maybe it's fear of not having enough food, and then come into the present to see, what do I actually have, and what's the reality right now? So many of us can go into our refrigerators and our cupboards and see and take some inventory of, we have enough food. So it's very practical. So I know that's a food thing. Worry about losing our homes. Right now we have shelter. To take inventory of what we have in the moment that will help us feel secure. Once we feel we're aware of what our true needs are, then we can begin to start thinking about a plan of action or tools, and understanding that we are interconnected human beings, and a lot of us have not been taught, sorry, I think we just went off, we're back, not encouraged to actually ask for help, right? So
Yeah, I think when we take on big deal stressors, like some questions like, is there enough food? Am I going to survive this? Is my house going to stay standing?
Right.
Am I going to lose my job and everything that I worked hard for? Is my family going to leave me or get sick or something like that? These are big deals, right? I'm not sure much of this is meant for an individual to solve on their own. On the other hand, we need our own practices. But one of the practices is to have community, is to have connections with other people and to work on that. Just like it's an important practice to have discipline in your life so that you can do your best, and it may not always work out, to maintain important connections in your life, like the job that provides the income you need to feed and take care of your family. It's required sort of regularity and discipline. So as an example, let's say you need to get to work every day at early. Let's say 6 o'clock. You have the type of job that you need to be there very early. Well, if for whatever reasons you don't go to bed early enough and therefore are exhausted and miss your alarm clock and don't get to work, you don't maintain that job, right? I mean, so it becomes important how you're handling the day before. Like, so are you disciplined, organized enough to get what you need done so you can get to bed at the hour you need to, so you do that. Now, for some people, this is very challenging. So this is not only challenging because the discipline takes work, but because there may be so many types of stressors at the same time. Maybe you have 2 jobs you have to handle at once. Maybe you have 2 jobs and 5 people that you have to take care of. This is when we get overwhelmed, but this is when we really need and value support from other people. There are limits to what an individual can do. And of course, if you're feeling that stressed, it may demand that you look for, ask for, and find a way to get the help that you need, because it may not be humanly possible for one person to do that. There are a lot of types of spiritual practice where you accept, that's what you accept the conditions. Well, some of those types of conditions which interfere with frank survival are not acceptable. So you can't necessarily accept the fact that you alone have to work 2 jobs and take care of 5 people, and you don't have anyone to go to. That's hard to accept. That's something that needs to change, and the stress you're experiencing is indicative of the fact that your body's mind, spirit complex is trying to make the necessary adjustment. And this is, when it comes to managing stress, there are things you can do proactively to try to, which is the discipline and the organization. And then there's ways you handle it when you're feeling it. And one of the things that I think is so important is we have a network of people in our lives that can help us when we're feeling overwhelmed. That's a worthwhile investment for all people, which is, again, why we think community is such a vital part of our survival and our ability to not just survive, but to thrive.
Absolutely.
So managing stress is those things. And then I think there's one other important thing that we can maybe discuss in the last few minutes, which is expectations and the story. If we have certain types of expectations, and as a result of them not getting met, we tell ourselves a story that other things are going to happen or not happen. We can see by virtue of that phenomena that we increase our stress levels by holding on to certain things, certain expectations, especially from the world or other people, and the stories we tell ourselves. And so it's very hard not to do those things. I admit from my own personal experience, I have certain expectations that if I work hard, I'm going to be compensated for my work. I'm going to be appreciated for my work, and that's going to help me live my life. If that didn't work out, I'd probably be very disappointed and annoyed. So there's certain expectations that seem reasonable, but to the extent that we go beyond what's reasonable, and this is a fine line, and it's not for us to say to anyone how you draw that line, but if you find yourself being let down a lot, if you find yourself then going into the stories about how other people are frustrating you, or the world is frustrating you, or the worry about all these things is going on, that may be indication that maybe it's worth looking at how you're setting up these expectations, because I think my feeling is that that's adding stress to you that may be amenable to some adjustment by virtue of the habit you may be in by the expectations and the storytelling.
So I would just add a simple saying. This is derived out of the 12-step philosophy, is the wisdom to know what you actually can control, what you are in control of. So what I hear you saying is a lot of projections. So we know for just awareness, even including for my own self, when I am projecting and reacting to outside influences, that I am distracted. I am no longer focused on what it is that I need in this moment. And I think, just to clarify Michael's saying the story, we all have the story. And even if we could just say to ourselves, what I tell myself is this person X, Y, and Z, it helps us just discern. We need the story, yet we don't get enmeshed into the story and lose ourselves in relation to other. So I think it's really, really important that we could have a whole talk on stories, what we tell ourselves, but it really is important to include all of what we're sharing today about stress, and start really asking yourself or paying more attention to your physical body, your reactions to others, to the chemical and physical is the same. If you don't get a good night's sleep, it throws your hormones off. And if you're not eating and taking a pause and a lunchtime, how many of us have gone a whole day and just got caught up in work and did not take a lunch for ourselves?
Well, so the core practices of slow medicine are about self-care on all these different levels, because that's what helps you stay in balance and in harmony and tolerant of a lot of the things that you can't control.
Right.
And so there are those variables in our lives around us and right in our homes that will challenge us and that they will be stressful. But the idea is not to try to avoid all stress, but is when exposed to something challenging us that could be stressful, we handle it in a way that doesn't accumulate, and then
we're better equipped.
doesn't hurt us. And so that's really the issue here, is not to eliminate stress, but to manage it more effectively and to be able to ride with the waves, and in the highest way to see how this whole process contributes to our achievement of the North Star, the path that ultimately leads us to a place where we may not have to work this hard, but for now we do. And
I want to add one more thing. I'm going to interrupt because I'm excited about this. So our response to a threat creates a sense. We were talking earlier. It helps us determine whether we're going to be safe or not. The thing about human beings, which is just we're extraordinary, is that how powerful that the thoughts that we have, which is what we're talking about, the stories, thinking in terms, I'll sum it up, thinking about what it is that we do want. Many of us get looping in what's not working, and that is going to recreate the stress in the body. So I just want to add to remember that the power of our body can heal with really thinking about the things that you want to create in your life. Maybe it's better health, better sleep, better relationships, and use the power of the mind and how profound, and our hearts, which are the first organs that are developed when we're, when we're a fetus. It's the heart. Come into the heart more, and that will actually have a beautiful response on the physical, the emotional, even the chemical. It can override. So just wanted to add that in. It's my new practice for the week, to think about what it is that we need and what we would like, how we would like to see it, opposed to thinking, oh God, the lion chased me once. It's no, I want to create freedom and safety, and I want to go out into the jungle and not be afraid, and how we can go about those things, have a little plan.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful. Ultimately, our mind determines how we're going to be. And in including even how our body responds. It's true that our body will respond unconsciously to some things, but our mind is what we have control over. Back to your comment about the wisdom to know what we can control. You can control your mind, part of which is to take care of your body, but also to keep your eye on that North Star, work with your relationships and your community. And those are the things that you can do that will bring you in a state of better balance, which will mean you will recover more quickly from the challenges and stay on the path. That's ultimately what we wish for you. A lot of this is, to know things is one thing, to apply them is the other. And in the end, our hope is that you take, what we're sharing here, it helps clarify some things for you, and it gives you, in particular, some ideas about how you can put this into practice for yourself that will lead you to feeling much better. Anyway, that's the spirit of our show, our connection. We thank you for joining us. I will be traveling next week. Robin will be here in Sunraven. We're going to try to connect in 2 different places, so stay with us, and we appreciate that. Maybe next Wednesday, Robin will talk about what you mentioned, which is the story we tell ourselves, and maybe we can commiserate a little bit because there's some dominant stories out there that we're all facing together in this global situation, and how those stories perhaps can be rewritten, not even in terms of our prediction or future, how chapter 2, 3, 4, 5 wind up, but how we even reframe the current story so that we can see it as something that already has inherent properties of something positive, something more positive than we tend to be telling ourselves right now. So anyway, that's what I would suggest.
Absolutely. Sounds great. And I wish you all ease. The opposite of stress is come up with a word of your own and maybe use that as an intention for yourself for the week.
I think it's flow. I think, because stress...
Mine is ease. Michael's is flow.
Yeah, because I think it's not about ending stress. It's about continuing to be moving despite stress toward the goal, down the river into the great ocean. So anyway, thank you again for joining us. If you want to reach out to us, slowmedicine.org is the website. info@slowmedicine.org is our email. You probably can find us, of course, on Facebook. And we'd love to hear from you with any ideas or suggestions that you may have. And we wish you a great week. And we'll be here again in 7 days. Bye-bye.